Hi, I'm Catherine Bischoff, Chief Relationship Officer at Factory Berlin. We're sad we couldn't be with you in Austin, Texas for South by Southwest, but thrilled you could join us today online as we welcome our Factory Berlin artists in residence who curated this panel discussion on the interplay between music and visual culture for South by Southwest 2021. Enjoy, and thanks to all of you for watching.
Thank you, Catherine, and very happy that all of you can join us today for this South by Southwest panel on the interplay between music and visual culture. I'm Anya Catherine. I'm an artist based in LA, and I'm joined by Deja Tai, Aaron Jablonski, and Tony Cruz. So I'll let them introduce themselves.
I'm Tony Cruz. I'm a sound artist, producer, and DJ based in Maryland currently. I spent time in Seattle. I spent some time in Berlin with the Factory Berlin residency. I've done some viral sound for the Jenners and dozens of campaigns for different brands and also limited run merchandising, cassette tapes, and installation work. And yeah, really grateful to be a part of this panel discussion.
Yeah, then I go next. I'm Aaron Jablonski. I'm a digital artist and a creative technologist from Germany, currently living in Berlin. I work with XR, 3D, real-time environments, and creative coding. I create XR experiences, face filters, and I often explore dystopian or surreal ideas. In my XR work, I work with fashion brands, musicians, other artists, museums, and the like. But I also work with CGI and 3D. I create abstract sculptures in virtual reality, and I put them in real-time environments or do renderings with them.
Hi, I'm Deja Tai, also based in Los Angeles. I'm an immersive artist and HCI technologist working in the context of larger experiential works that are multifaceted, working with teams of fabricators, AR artists, musicians, choreographers, and such. So a lot of my work takes the form of either installation work, online experiences, working with fashion brands, or commissioned works. Anya and I also have a collaborative practice, and our practice merges creative technology, immersive environments, and choreography and performance art. So Anya, I think also you should speak a bit about yourself as well.
Sure. Like I said, I'm Anya Catherine. I'm based in LA. My background is in choreography and performance art and film. And as Deja mentioned, we have a collaborative practice kind of merging all of our worlds, environments, performance, and creative technology. And while all of us have kind of very different backgrounds, I think the subject of music and visual culture kind of intertwining in what all of us do is definitely a thread that weaves us all together, and in all very different ways as well. So when thinking about this subject of the relationship between music and visual culture, and I told our friend about the title of this panel, and he was like, well, that's a very broad subject. And I was like, it is a really broad subject. Like there's so many ways that we could start to talk about this. But initially, my first thought was just to share, like, going back to when you would buy music before ever listening to it based on album art, and this experience of like seeing an image on a vinyl or seeing an image on a CD or seeing a poster and just being like, I'm intrigued by this. I think I'll like what they do based on this image they chose or based on how they're dressed. And just kind of go back to these early experiences and ask any of you if you have any formative moments or experiences where you remember choosing to listen something based on what you saw first.
I'd like to go first, and there's a moment that's really near and dear to me that comes to mind. I remember being in Florida in Universal Studios on like a vacation with my family, and there was and we went to like a Sam Goody type music store. Like those stores and those CD shelves are pretty much defunct now, but I remember there being a CD of a song that I liked, and I said, "Oh, I want to get the CD." But the selling point was that it was an enhanced CD, so you'd put the CD-ROM into a laptop, and this is when laptops had CD bays in them, and yeah, and it included a music video by the band whose song it was. And this was really interesting to me because I had purchased I'd known about the song because of the music video, and at the time there was this music video channel called The Box. I'm not sure if y'all have had The Box. It was like an offshoot of MTV, I think, but you could call in and order a music video that would play around your neighborhood. So it was really cool where you like call in and you punch in a couple numbers and they charge your AT&T bill $2-3, and the music video will play for everyone. And when I got to Florida, I had known about this song because of the music video, so I bought the enhanced CD, and this is when I was like 8 or 9. So the pairing of music and visuals, whether it's in these like super highly produced industry ways, or even today in the kind of like micro interactions that we have through social media, has been like a mainstay in my life since I could remember.
I really want to bring back that concept. I love the idea of just like taking over everyone in the neighborhood's screen and playing a film or like a little visual gift for everybody. It's a
Like
cool
a
concept.
jukebox.
Yeah, or like a community VJ.
It was, I think that must have been where the name came from. It was called The Box. So it must have been like, yeah, it's like kind of like a jukebox where you go up and put a coin in the 50s and 60s and you get your like milkshake and everyone, does the twist or whatever. But yeah, it was really cool. It was really cool. It was kind of it sounds like a hyper 90s thing. The music videos in general. But yeah, it was super interesting. As far as I know, it was a regional thing, so it was around the DC metropolitan area, may have been around New York, may not have been. For my understanding is all my West Coast and left coast friends, they didn't have a thing like this, but it was really cool. You'd get a lot of the same videos over and over and over, and that whole music video culture is another subject in its own that I'm sure we'll reach at some point in this discussion.
So now we're kind of far from that, where we're at Sam Goody and looking at a bunch of CD covers and being like, ooh, I like this image. But actually there is kind of a similar thing happening right now, like with Spotify. And I find it very interesting that sometimes if you see it like cover art on Spotify, there's a lot of times when I pick something because I like how it looks and I do actually like the sound. So there I don't know what that link is. And then there's other times where you look and you're like, I definitely wouldn't like this, and then it doesn't match your aesthetic. So this link between what someone likes visually might translate into what they like sonically, and whether there's a connection there, I think is kind of fun because it sometimes does work. I'm like, I love this image, and then I love how it sounds as well. But so with Spotify, this is kind of similar. And like Tony, representing your music online, how do you choose imagery and how do you decide what square or what image is going to represent something that you've been working on that is not a visual medium?
That's a good question. Music to me isn't about sales or selling records or getting a certain number of plays. I get some very awesome opportunities by just being genuine and following my heart, and then the art kind of speaks volumes about what I'm experiencing as an individual and as an artist, and then it resonates in a way that's authentic. So a lot of times I'm just taking things that I see immediately around me and recontextualizing them into something that is authentic, that can that can represent the music. I find it very difficult to settle on an image though, especially with the limitations of this kind of like square 3x3 grid, how it will fit. That gives me a ton of anxiety. And it gives me so much anxiety. And I archive things often because of the byproduct of that anxiety. I will say though, in instances where I outsourced that that aspect of the release, so to speak, I have seen great success in terms of plays and reach and you know yeah, like I remember working with an artist who right now he's based at the University of Southern California, Amir Cooler, and it was for a song that I released called Replica. And I had this idea of wanting to use the Ouroboros, and he went to town with it, made printed out some designs, scanned them back in, flipped them upside down. And that piece did really well. Like, even though sonically it was never mixed or mastered, sonically it wasn't even in a 4/4 time signature. It's a really weird thing because it had such a strong visual element of it from someone whose entire lens is visual. Well, I don't want to limit him, but in highly visual and highly talented is Amir. The song was able to resonate in ways that I would not have been able to. I wouldn't have afforded it the agency that it needed, because visually it would have just been more personal for me. And I think he had other people's sensibilities at mind that really helped it. So I think, yeah, that's one good example. The Replica song, it's on Spotify, it's on Bandcamp, and I did like a music video in LA at where I crashed like a stone's throw pool's party with like a mannequin or something. So that was another aspect of it, was like having an in life, real life promotion aspect of it too really helped, because that got documented. And then the folks that were at the pool the day that I crashed it, like walking in with the mannequin, they tagged me and amplified the song, and it got a decent number of streams. So yeah.
And both Aaron and Deja, both of you have, in different ways, whether it's album art or music videos, have worked with musicians to kind of translate something that exists as a song or as an album and represented that visually. So kind of like how Tony just said, he was working with a visual artist who like took that, ran with it, but like really focusing on the visual as a vehicle to communicate the music to people before they heard it. If either of you can speak to those experiences of like how you do that, or examples of an approach that you took, that would be super cool.
Well, for me, I've worked in a few different modes. One mode is what you're describing now, which is more of a translation of music. The other mode is where, and Aaron, you and I were talking about this earlier, where there's this total work where the music and the visual aspect, and I would go even further to say sort of the physical experience, and reaching beyond the physical sense as well, in terms of like our senses. Those are all considered equally to create an experience, and it's not heroing the music or the visual or the feeling of the space, but they are working together to create something completely different than any of the components could provide individually. But early on in my career, I focused more on, or my experience was more on translating music in a visual medium. So I started early out being very inspired by record labels like 4AD, where their visual imprint was just, I was just mesmerized by the work, the visual work of Von Oliver, and Chris Biggs with the Cocteau Twins album covers, This Mortal Coil, Dead Can Dance. And I just, that was very compelling to me. Also Storm Thurgeson and this idea of not using Photoshop, but actually setting up a real world scene where you have a tree and you're giving it a haircut in the shape of a human head. And then you stand back and you take a photo. And this in-camera technique was something that I could get lost in, and I was experimenting as much as possible and moving away from the digital aspect as much as I could. To the point where there was this record cover I did for Julie Slick, who is a bass player from Philadelphia. She's more in the prog rock and King Crimson type scene, but a young musician. And I created an album cover for her that was made out of foam core and light, but it kind of looked like completely digitally created, which wasn't really my intention, but it's interesting, how the physical can appear digital and sometimes vice versa. But moving on, then my career kind of moved into translating music visually in a live context. And this was very interesting to me because as a jazz lover, and growing up in Philadelphia where music is the soul of that town, going to jazz clubs where there's 7 people, at this show, and I could not be immersed anymore. I think these are my favorite, immersive experiences, just being in a small room with a few other people and the musicians, a couple feet away. I don't need anything else. I don't need any other visuals. I don't need any interactivity other than what that experience affords. But at the same time, I think it's not, for me, translating a musical show isn't about necessarily making the music, like filling in a gap that the music isn't. It's just a completely different medium. And so that's interesting. From like, that is where I've used technology more extensively, creating reactive visuals, where there was a project I did with Rick Feds in Riga in Latvia, and we basically composed a audio visual sort of show where it felt like we were writing songs together, because he is a finger drummer. I mean, he's a drummer playing on acoustical sets, but on this particular show he's just this phenomenal finger drummer, and he was using an Ableton kit, and we tied everything in this venue. I was like 100 feet away, so we like ran Ethernet from his laptop on the stage to like my machine up at the top of this theater, and we had DMX lighting running through the entire ceiling and the floors, and then there was projection behind him. And so like every note and the velocity of every note and how he touched, like how hard he pressed or how quickly he let go, all of that sort of nuance was reflected in the sort of visual experience. And that was really nice, because I remember we were in the studio working together, and it felt like we were writing a song, but it was like a visual audio song. And we're like, okay, well, this sound feels like this visual. And then he would like play it out. He's like, yeah. And we're like, yeah, but that doesn't look right. So he would adjust what he was playing. And that felt very collaborative. And then I think I would fast forward, that's an example of a live show. And that can also, take form in a music video. Anya, you and I have directed a number of music videos together for Madame Gandhi, Robot Koch, and Little Ashes, where we're visualizing the music, but we're more creating a world and less a one-to-one, this sound looks like this, but we're creating a world that kind of is sort of a visual container for this music. And then I think moving more to what I create now is experiential works that do not necessarily translation like I was saying before, but back to Aaron, what we were talking about of this total work. I think of the project that we all did at Factory Berlin together for the Privacy Collection, where you weren't really sure when you walked into that space, we're hearing Tony's work, we're hearing his voice, we're using an AR XR app that Aaron created to consume ourselves within the show, as well as the artwork itself in the space. And, you know, Anya, you and I had created this privacy trench coat, the signal blocking trench coat, and all of these mediums kind of interpreted this, what the function of this, you know, digital artwork that we created, and created this multimedia tapestry. And I think when you walked into that room of that show, you weren't sure where the feeling was coming from. You know, am I responding to the music? Am I responding to the poetry on the wall? Am I responding to the magic of this AR filter? Am I responding to the fashion? Am I responding to the projection, the art photography? What is it that is giving me this feeling? And I like that in experiential works, all of these sort of pieces in the puzzle and like cogs in the machine, you can't really identify what is generating this feeling inside. And I think for me and my practice, that is the most interesting place to experiment and to work within. And of course, we're doing that right now for all four of us, with a team all over the world. We're all creating this London Fashion Week presentation, which coming out on the 22nd of February. So, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to that, because I think it's an extension of our collaboration at Factory Berlin. But yeah, that's speaking a bit to my experiences.
Yeah, I think for me, always the connection between the real and the virtual plays a role in my work, and that ties also into the project we did together on your privacy collection, where I was happy to be invited by you to contribute some XR work that I did. And I think what happened there in this experience was that we kind of like connected the real exhibition to some virtual aspects of it by enabling visitors to activate this additional XR layer and to then become part of the concept of the exhibition, because it was an XR filter that kind of like made your silhouette or made you unrecognizable to the camera, basically rendering you invisible or blending in with the environment. So by using this filter, you became part of the exhibition yourself in a way. And so we kind of like created this transition from the real to the virtual, or back and forth.
I think the most astonishing element of that collaboration, that collaboration was so near and dear to my heart. It was so special. I was most astonished by how, even though we had so many components going on, we drew almost a little bit more than a minimum of each in a way that didn't seem to overwhelm any of the visitors. And even though we have a visual aspect, we have a fashion aspect, we have a textile aspect, we have a surveillance capitalism mechanism that we're questioning, we have nuanced sound, we have augmented reality filter, and it didn't seem to overwhelm everyone. It was as if it was natural. And I think those are the expectations that we are vying for in even the smallest micro interaction on social media or even in person these days. There's the barometer for just expectations that folks have with the piece of art, and the range that it has is either at an all-time high or an all-time new weird phaseville.net.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel the same way about kind of being blown away by so many things working together at the same time, and still feeling very cohesive and almost minimal, even though what went into it was so maximal, so much thought, so much conceptual grinding. But when you went in there, it almost felt bare, even though there it was so rich. So I think that was a nice way that everything kind of complemented each other and became more than the sum of its parts, which is unique. And before we move on to more into new technologies, I'm curious, Aaron, I remember when we were at Factory Berlin, and we were all screening, some of our work. You played a music video that you made, and you did like an entire 3D world around it. And I'm just curious for people that don't know usually like how these processes go when a musician like asks a visual artist to make a video. Like how was that process, and how did you end on like what you decided to make? And was it collaborative with the musician, or was it like, here's the song, go? How did that process go?
Yeah, we did this music video with a team here from Berlin. I co-directed it with Giusy Amoroso, and yeah, it was a back and forth with the artist, with the music artist Catnap. Yeah, we created. It was also kind of like tapping into this bridging of real and virtual spaces, because we created a 3D scan avatar of her, and then basically put her into her own dreamscape, dream world of a space that she felt connected to with her music. So it was kind of like a back and forth between figuring out what she wanted to address with her music, and then giving us an immense amount of freedom also on how we want to yeah, direct it, make it look, and what kind of direction we want to go visually. Yeah, so it was like it was a great collaboration.
So Aaron, can you tell us a bit about that project, the Boiler Room project with DJ Dixon, that you did in terms of visualizing music and collaborating with musicians?
Yeah, so we did a DJ stream with DJ Dixon on the Transmoderna platform for Boiler Room TV, where we created a 3D scan of the DJ, rather a depth scan with a Kinect camera that allowed us to create this, again, like this transition from real to virtual. So the stream started as a usual DJ stream with a 2D camera, just aiming at being pointed at the DJ, showing him performing. And then it developed into this 3D experience where we transitioned into the point cloud scan of the DJ. Then we could rotate around him. And then we were going basically fully virtual reality, and put the DJ performing in a virtual environment, which was like this surreal alien-esque underwater world with full of creatures, etc. And we did this with a team here in Berlin, and I did the art direction together with Giusy Amoroso. And yeah, I think it was like an interesting project on many aspects, like creating something engaging in this quarantine time, and also creating something a bit different from regular streams that were popping up during this time.
Yeah, and what you just said about Avatar kind of brings me into something else. People, musicians representing themselves visually, but also, Aaron, as you've mentioned, this kind of freedom or almost filters and augmented reality becoming, I mean, a lot of people are making avatars and, choosing to not show themselves physically, but instead be represented digitally by something else that's kind of a simulation or like a recreation or their ideal version of how they want to be seen in the world. So there's also this way that when musicians and everyone, feels like they have to be seen in order for, their music to be heard. There's like this cycle of needing to be visually represented constantly, that people are opting to be represented not in their physical selves, but either through a filter with as a mask or as an avatar. Um, what is your experience with this, or your thoughts on like the potential of AR as a way to feel a bit more free in the online space without exposing yourself too much?
Yeah, I think AR has a great potential in this sense, and like people like to become someone else for a second, or like they like to take on another role and transform themselves, be it like a fantasy character or some abstract role or some avatar that they're taking on. And but lately I noticed that it's really also been used to talk about more difficult topics, like to empower yourself on speaking out about subjects that you would otherwise not feel very comfortable with, to talk about difficult subjects, about your own past traumas on social media. And in these situations, I've seen AR filters being used, and I think this is a really interesting use case of AR on social media.
Yeah, definitely. And the kind of flip side of this as well, being that, young people that grow up seeing, it's not just you see a picture of yourself, but you always at any time have the ability to swipe and see like a more enhanced version of yourself. And the kind of ethical concerns over younger and younger people wanting to go get themselves like enhanced and have surgery to look more like the beauty that the filter gives them. So there's also, it's interesting. I mean, it's like technology generally, I think. It's not bad on its own and it's not great on its own. It's like a machine, and it depends on who has it, how it's used, who decides, and who has the power over how it's used. And also like what structures do we have in place to kind of keep it in check, which is, I think, not unique to filters. It's all technology kind of needs to be bound and considered within these constraints.
Yeah, I mean, of course, this is the downside of it, that all these kind of filters that you apply on top of yourself can also cause these kind of distortions in your self-perception, and definitely got to be careful with that, especially when you present these devices to young audiences, especially techniques like skin smoothing that exist in these frameworks, like in every augmented reality framework and face filter framework. And I always try to steer clients away from using these capabilities, because I think especially like skin smoothing is something that can lead to body dysmorphia, or it's just like unethical to be used to such an extent when your target audience is are teenagers, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also the like the potential for these kind of mediums to be like paid for by a skincare brand that's selling you something to make your skin smooth, and how this all kind of ties into surveillance. Like what you were mentioning about them being empowering is like, on the one hand, that totally makes sense. But like you said, if you go to something that like a young person might already be insecure about, and then make that possible through a filter and like reinforce that there's something more to be desired in their face or how they look, that's not based in fantasy, but more based in an idea of ideal beauty and perfection, I think we get into kind of murky territory. But there's a couple themes that I think tie back also to music and visual culture, which is how surveillance capitalism and also kind of our privacy nightmare scenario is working across fields in music. And Tony, you were saying something interesting earlier about the lifestyles and the lives of musicians being kind of what people are falling in love with and what people are following and what people are interested in even more than the music, and how the idea of portraying a certain image to create behavior or desires in your audience is kind of tricky territory. Like, where are you expressing yourself and where are we kind of selling empty dreams and promises that the world might not actually make possible for you?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of folks, obviously, they follow an artist or a musician or a celebrity because they identify with them on some aspect, whether it's a product that they have or a song that they made, something that's catchy. And I think a lot of folks use social media, people who are clever and who have a team of talented minds behind them can employ social media to portray an unrealistically perfect lifestyle without even filters, like just selfies in the PJs, but with the perfect lighting that no one can ever get, or music videos and folks counting money that's rented and that's fake. I mean, there's so many ways to but fabricate and to sell something, because it all ties back to selling something, selling a product. Folks don't do interviews unless they have something to promote. uh, I don't know, I kind of get lost just thinking about it though, but it's just very layered, and things are a lot more complex than they appear to be. On a TikTok video that gets 1 million views, and oftentimes they there are, I hope to not spoil anyone's career, but there are industries that are hiring people as full-time TikTok point of contacts and content creators, and these are high paying jobs. So you best believe that that dance craze that is just so catchy was choreographed by someone in an underrepresented community and was mass marketed.
Yeah. And did you feel like growing up and images and visual representation of the musicians that you like put an idea in your mind of like what you wanted to be and who you were going to be or aspiring to be?
Absolutely, absolutely. I just thought that if you were a talented musician, the rite of passage was 12 big booty girls shaking them in front of you, or and on to other extremes, listening to Cash Money growing up, and one of their, like, in the song Bling Bling, a line is Cash Money motto is the drink till you throw up. So these are the kind of messages that are instilled in children, and then the whole music industry just legitimizes it. I remember growing up, seeing artists in magazines. So you hear the artists on the radio, you don't get to see them, right? Then some magazine, whether it's Word Up or Essence or whatever magazine you subscribe to, you then get your first glimpse at that artist, if you haven't seen them in a music video already. But you get your first glimpse on something that you pay for, that is mailed to you, that you don't really know at that point is being curated, and the whole entire thing is fabricated. Not saying that some of these artists aren't talented, genius level individuals, because a lot of them are. But it's to me, I just find so many similarities between that subscription mail culture to now the highly produced lifestyle. But you can't really tell how highly produced it is on Insta and on social media, and when you seem to have subscribed to a behind the scenes all access pass. I remember all access pass footage used to be like rare DVDs, but now you have like DVD, underground DVD quality updates daily, and if you're not updating, I read something like if you don't update, to a story 6 times a day, you begin to lose your audience if you have one of these viral, or incredibly viral social media accounts. So I think there's some ties and some best practices that are being employed on unbeknownst followers, unsuspecting individuals, and there's just so much more that to meets the eye than the music and the art and the video and the style. Like, those things are I don't want to say they're more or less noble than getting the message out, but the music is the pure part. That's the creativity, that's the individuality, and that's the empathizing with someone's story, their narrative, and reaching and connecting and growing with an audience. But the way you sustain it ain't always pretty, right?
Mhm. Well, that also makes me think, as you're describing modern presentation of music and using social media as a vehicle to do that, that the visual representation of music often is just about optimizing for algorithms, optimizing for the platform that that your music is going on, whether it be an Instagram story or on your grid, as you say, that the grid is providing or I'm sorry, causing loads of anxiety, because that how your grid is presented reflects on whether your music is even heard or not. And I think, you were talking about subscription. Even on Instagram, if you subscribe, if I subscribe to Exit Simulation, right, Aaron's Instagram channel, then I might not see it, even though I've opted in. I might not see, Anya and I are married. Somehow, maybe I won't see her pop up on my feed as well because of whatever reason. I'm following Tony, but I'm not seeing every post. But it's like, I want to see every post. I've subscribed to the Tony Cruz channel. I want my Tony Cruz content, but it's like, no, Tony Cruz, like, he's not gonna get you to buy X, Y, and Z. So we're gonna just divert that and, feed you some other content that might up your engagement, so we can like use your viewership and your engagement to, sell to, third party companies who are using that data to, sell you stuff. And sell my friends stuff and sell my family stuff. So I think that's interesting to me, that the thing that you are presenting online to represent your project, your practice, your work has to fit and align with the algorithm and the models that work for Instagram in order for your music to be heard, which there is an asymmetry in what the soul of your music needs and how it needs to present itself, and what Instagram's algorithm, optimizes for. So, and Aaron, we've talked a lot about this too. I think that's very interesting because often, we're just providing free content, but we're not getting much in return as artists. I don't know if you want to expand on that, but I remember you and I had a in-depth conversation at Factory Berlin about this.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect as to like to what extent you want to incorporate these rules that you kind of like have to play to get the engagement from the algorithm on the social platforms, like to what extent you want to allow yourself to be to alter your art and your creative process by it. And I think the answer should be like to almost no extent you should alter your creative output to fit into this algorithm, but that's easier said than done if you want to be part of these platforms. And I mean, there's a lot of subconscious manipulation going on to keep you engaged and to keep you engaged in scrolling and interacting with the content. And I think it's actually like you really have to take a step back to be able to see to what extent it influences yourself and your practice. And like kind of like around this question, I did an artwork, an XR artwork, where I wanted to question my own relationship to social media, and I developed this augmented reality application on Unity as a platform, where I could take snapshots of my environment and put them directly into into my surroundings, and surround myself basically with social media posts, so they become part of this metaverse that's surrounding you. So basically taking the virtual content that you just consume in a virtual space on social media, and taking it in your real environment, and then filming this back and getting a video out of it that you can actually put on social media. So it's like this feedback loop of content creation that's going on.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, and also what Deja mentioned with being kind of stuck in these systems, where to even have, if you're a musician, like even having the chance to have your music be heard, to consider that like Instagram doesn't like text posts, but like what if your ideal visual representation of that album is one tiny word and a bunch of negative space, and that's how you want to communicate that music to the world. That's the entry point you want people to start from. But the algorithms, like, that's not going to sell anything because it doesn't, you know, have a body or a human face, and it's not a selfie, and so it's not going to give it a chance. And I think these are like structural issues that are also kind of putting people in a position where they have to compromise creatively if they even want to have their music have a shot to be heard, which I think is a huge issue that needs to be addressed. And to wrap up on kind of a more positive note, well, also one more thing, Tony, we were talking about how music doesn't have a physical form, which also ties into these kind of traps of representing and traps of like discovering new work. So that was really fascinating. Can you just speak a bit to kind of the lack of physicality of music right now, which puts us perpetually in these digital systems in order to even find or discover or share?
Yeah, I think this decade is unique in that if it's not a revival of sorts with cassettes, I do a lot of cassettes. I do a lot of unique cassettes, meaning I take existing cassettes and I write over them, which is a total infringement of copyright laws, but it's okay because they're used tapes that I just pick up, and it allows me to make an intentioned individual gift for each person who decides they would like to support my music. I'll make a unique cassette for you. It might be like the Commodores, and I'll record over to side B my album, and side A you'll have the Commodores. I think this is a unique approach, and it has allowed me to differentiate myself in an era where anyone with access to a studio and recording instruments has a digital musical presence, but not so much the physical aspect of it. But I think this decade is super new uncharted territory, Bill, because there is no ubiquitous medium that music is being released on that is at the cusp of its technology. Like in the 80s, 70s, you had tapes, vinyls, 90s, 2000s, you had CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays. We're at a time now where all of that stuff is at the thrift store, and the Bose stores are closing down, and we don't have this new technological advance in the arena of sound that is promoting the highest fidelity possible. It seems like we may have reached that already, and we're regressing and going backwards. Or maybe folks are caring less and less about the quality. I mean, not the quality, but the resolution of the music, and focusing more on the uniqueness, on those intangibles that can't be replicated and it can't be mastered and mixed and improved upon. They're just more those indelible nuances that sound artists bring. And the same happens in every medium. You know, photographers, I feel like the medium of photography has been bastardized by social media. Imagine being a photographer like in the 90s and the 2000s and not having access to a phone. Like how can you even be considered a photographer now? You know, like no one will believe you. Like, I mean, I'm saying this in jest, but it's true. And same for pretty much everything. Has just been accelerated and maximized and sold to the highest bidder. It just seems to be happening in every industry. So I think it takes an extra step and an extra leap of faith and an extra it just takes more concerted effort to differentiate yourself. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with being a completely digital artist at all. I think that comes with as much nuance as an analog artist, you know, might have within their realm of expertise as well. But I may have sidetracked a bit, but
One
Yeah.
thing that no, totally. And I think you had mentioned how the way that we experience music now is it's very ubiquitous, and we don't have this like monolith or this singular format in which this is the new way to listen to music on these, you know, particular high-end speakers, and this is like the new delivery format. But the delivery format is completely decentralized, right? So it's like even take the project, the Thomas Heath project that we're working on right now for London Fashion Week. We can hear, Tony, your contribution of the music and the sound within this like web browser experience, but then also you can hear just a lift of that in the XR filter that Aaron is creating. And so you are getting different sort of snippets and viewpoints, and your entry point to the music is entirely different. And I think, I mean, for me, that seems like an advantage, because you can experience something in many different ways. And how I experience something in a live context, in a live venue, versus at home, you know, on a turntable, versus music within an AR experience or a VR experience where I'm part of that experience as well. It just changes the sound of the music, how I hear that music in a film. So, I mean, I quite like this sort of decentralized vehicle and format, and it's not just all, you know, here's the radio station, here's the music video, here are your like 4 different options of how you can listen to this. But like I can listen as like TikTok, where you have, you know, it's a soundtrack for like whatever that person is doing, whether it's like eating a sandwich or whatever. It's just like it's a completely different like juxtaposition, which is like an art form unto its own, you know. But yeah, no singular formats, I think, is an advantage. Of course, everything has its flip side as well.
Yeah, and on the another note, I really would love, Aaron, if you could describe a bit about the project that you did with Dua Saleh with AR, just as an example of kind of how musicians are using new technologies to kind of connect and engage their audiences, particularly in lockdown scenarios where there is no opportunity for live interaction and live performances.
Yeah, so I was involved in this project, music video project that has had AR as a central aspect of it, and we created together with 4 AR artists. We created face filters for the musician Dua Saleh. It's a non-binary musician from Minneapolis. So we created these 4 filters for them, and they were being released on Instagram for the fans to try out and submit footage with while like dancing or performing the track. And then this was edited in to becoming the music video for this track. So it was like this way of using augmented reality as a form of audience engagement and also as another form of expression and combination between audiovisual content.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful example of how we can right now share, basically we can only share digital space together because we can't share physical space together. So like these techniques, like that project, also similarly to the project we're all working on together now, where you're brought into the protagonist's dark room through using the filter where you're even in the room, so you can kind of imagine that you're next to the protagonist hearing the music and like in her surroundings through this beautiful filter that Aaron made. That it can really be used to like transport audiences into these visual worlds that artists, you know, want to bring their audiences to. And so I think, just to conclude, unless anyone else has any other final thoughts, remarks. No. Okay. Yeah, I think hearing everyone's perspective is really amazing, and everyone comes at this from such different angles. And while there are definitely challenges brought about by right now, number one, everyone being entirely digital, number two, not really having a physical medium for music right now that's current, and everything being like, I see it and am I going to click it in order to hear this thing? And that pressure that puts on musicians to like fit within surveillance capitalist algorithm standards to even have a chance to be heard. There's all of this, and then these exciting possibilities of engaging audiences all around the world using AR and XR to bring people closer to you when we're all, you know, distanced. We have just like a lot of conversations. There's a lot of benefits, and then there's a lot of challenges brought about by where we're at right now with art and technology and music. But I think this is a really excellent discussion, and thank you all. And thank you, Factory Berlin, for bringing us all together, and South by Southwest for hosting.